Iskon ki, Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagvatam ki. Shri Koditaya Ma Pishashi ki. So first we'll read from Nectar of Devotion. Very important book this. What's up? Oh, I thought you were going to ask me something. No. This book is very educational for anyone who wants to become a devotee. It gives the understanding of devotional principles, the mood of devotion, and ultimately how to obtain that nectar of devotion. If we're not obtaining the nectar of devotion, then we should read a bit more of the nectar of devotion so we can find out how to. This has given us all just like there's a little arrow in the book, this whole book is an arrow pointing us in the direction of Krishna's lotus feet. So this is a chapter entitled Evidence Regarding Devotional Principles Residing in a Sacred Place. In the Skanda Purana, it is also said that for a person who has lived in Dwarka for 6 months, for 1 month, or even for 1 fortnight, there is awaiting elevation to the Vaikuntha Lokas and all the prophets of Sarupya Mukti, the privilege of having the same 4-handed bodily features as Narayan. In Brahma Purana, it is said, the transcendental significance of Purushottam Kshetra, which is the 80 square mile field of Lord Jagannath, cannot be properly described. Even the demigods from higher planetary systems see the inhabitants of this Jagannath Puri as having exactly the same bodily features possessed by one in Vaikuntha. That is, the demigods see the inhabitants of Jagannath Puri as being 4-handed. When there was a meeting of great sages in Naimisharanya, Sutta Goswami was reciting Srimad Bhagvatam, and the importance of the Ganges was stated as follows. The waters of the Ganges are always carrying the flavour of Tulsi offered at the lotus feet of Sri Krishna, and as such the waters of the Ganges are ever flowing, spreading the glories of Lord Krishna. Wherever the waters of the Ganges are flowing, all will be sanctified both externally and internally. Shri Bhaktira Samrita Sindhu Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagvatam, Canto 7, Chapter 9, entitled Prahlad Pacifies the Lord with Prayers, Text 10. Viprad, Dvi, Sad, Guna, Yutad, Aravinda, Naba, Viprad, Dvi, Sad, Guna, Yutad, Aravinda, Naba, Padaravinda, Vimuktat, Swapachan, Varistam, Padaravinda Vimukat Swapacham Varistam, Manye Tad Arpita Mano Vachane Hitarta, Manye Tadarpita Mano Vachane Hitarta, Pranam Punati Sa Kulam Na Tu Buddhimana, Pranam Punati Sakulam Na Tu Buddhimana. Vipradvisad Guna Yutadara Vindanaba, Vipradvisadgunayutadaravindanabha Padaravinda Vimukat Swapacham Varistam Padaravinda Vimukat Swapacham Varistam Manye Tadarpita Manovachane Hitarta Manye Tadarpita Manovachane Hitarta Pranam Punati Sakulam Natu Burimana Pranam Punati Sakulam Natu Burimana Vipradvisadguna Yutadaravindanabha Padaravinda Vimukat Swapacham Varistam Manye Tad Arpita Manovachane Hitarta Pranam Punati Sakulam Natu Purimana. Please chant. Anybody else? Viprat, then a Brahman. Dvi Satguna Yutat, qualified with 12 Brahminical qualities. So there's a footnote here. These are the 12 qualities of a perfect Brahmin: following religious principles, speaking truthfully, controlling the senses by undergoing austerities and penances, being free from jealousy, being intelligent, being tolerant, creating no enemies, performing yajna, giving charity, being steady, being well versed in Vedic study, and observing vows. Aravindanabha, Lord Vishnu, who has a lotus growing from his navel. Pada Aravinda, to the lotus feet of the Lord. Vimukat, not interested in devotional service. Swapacham, one born in a low family. or a dog-eater. Tharistam, more glorious. Manye, I consider. Tat arpita, surrendered unto the lotus feet of the Lord. Mana, his mind. Vachana, words. Ihita, every endeavor. Artha, wealth. Pranam, and life. Punati, purifies. Saha, he, the devotee. Kulam, his family. Na, not. To, but. Virimana, one who falsely thinks himself to be in a prestigious position. Translation. If a Brahmin has all 12 qualities, has all 12 of the Brahminical qualifications as they are stated in the book called Sanat Sujata, but is not a devotee and is averse to the lotus feet of the Lord, he is certainly lower than a devotee who is a dog-eater, but who has dedicated everything, mind, words, activities, wealth, and life to the Supreme Lord. Such a devotee is better than such a Brahmin because the devotee can purify his whole family, whereas the so-called Brahmin in a position of false prestige cannot purify even himself. Please repeat. If a Brahmin has all 12 of the Brahminical qualifications, as they are stated in the book called Sanat Sujata, but is not a devotee, and is averse to the lotus feet of the Lord, he is certainly lower than a devotee who is a dog-eater, but who has dedicated everything, mind, words, activities, wealth, and life, to the Supreme Lord. Such a devotee is better than such a Brahmin, because the devotee can purify his whole family. Whereas the so-called Brahmin, in a position of false prestige, cannot purify even himself. So Prabhupada's purport here is a statement by Prahlad Maharaj, one of the 12 authorities, regarding the distinction between a devotee and a Brahmin, expert in karma kanda or Vedic ritualistic ceremonies. There are 4 varnas and 4 ashrams which divide human society, but the central principle is to become a first-class pure devotee. It is said in the Hari Bhakti Sudodaya, Bhagavad Bhakti Hinasya Jati Shastram Japastapa. Apranashyaiva dehasya mandanam lokaranjanam. If one is born in a high family like that of a Brahmin, Kshatriya or Vaishya, but is not a devotee of the Lord, all his good qualifications as a Brahmin, Kshatriya or Vaishya are null and void. Indeed, they are considered decorations of a dead body. In this verse, Prahlad Maharaj speaks of the Vipras, the learned Brahmins. The learned Brahmin is considered best among the divisions of Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. But a devotee born in a low Chandal family is better than such Brahmins, not to speak of the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and others. A devotee is better than anyone, for he is in the transcendental position on the Brahman platform. Mam cha yo vyapichare na bhakti yogana sevate sagunan samititaityan brahmabhaya kalpate. One who engages in devotional service, who does not fall down in any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. 12 qualities of a first-class Brahmin, as stated in the book called Sanat Sujata, are as follows. Jnanam cha satyam cha dhamma shrutam cha yamat saryam rish titikshana suya yagyascha danan cha driti samascha mahavrata dvadasa brahmanasya. The European and American devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement are sometimes accepted as Brahmins, but the so-called caste Brahmins are very much envious of them. In answer to such envy, Prahlad Maharaj says that one who has been born in a Brahmin family but is falsely proud of his prestigious position cannot even purify himself, not to speak of his family. Whereas if a Chandala or low-born person is a devotee and has fully surrendered unto the lotus feet of the Lord, he can purify his entire family. We have had actual experience of how Americans and Europeans, because of their full Krishna consciousness, have purified their whole families, so much so that a mother of a devotee at the time of her death inquired about Krishna with her last breath. Therefore, it is theoretically true and has been practically proven that a devotee can give the best service to his family, his community, his society, and his nation. The foolish accuse a devotee of following the principles of escapism, but actually the fact is that a devotee is the right person to elevate his family. A devotee engages everything in the service of the Lord, and therefore he is always exalted. Om Agyanat Tamarandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshun Militam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vakam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Lagate Grim Yarkripa Tamam Bande Shri Grim Janataranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. If a Brahmin has all 12 of the Brahminical qualifications, as they're stated in the book called Sanat Sujata, but is not a devotee and is averse to the lotus feet of the Lord, he is certainly lower than a devotee who is a dog-eater, but who has dedicated everything, mind, words, activities, wealth, and life to the Supreme Lord. Such a devotee is better than a Brahmin because the devotee can purify his whole family, whereas the so-called Brahmin in a position of false prestige cannot even purify himself. So, first point here is that Prahlad Maharaj is one of the 12 authorities. What does he mean by that? 12 Mahajans. Yeah, what does that mean? Does anybody know any other Mahajans? Yeah, Bhishma Dev. I used to know. I can't remember all of them. I used to know them all. Yeah, so these are great personalities. And we see even Bhishma Dev, when he was lying on a bed of arrows, then people were keen to hear from him because he's Jayananda Prabhu. Haribol. Haribol. A notebook would help stay awake, actually. If you take notes in class, it engages your mind more. So these great personalities, they wanted to hear from Bhishma Dev at the time of death, at his time. And he was, even though he was lying in a bed of arrows, he was so fixed that he could still speak Krishna consciousness. He could still speak the truth. He wasn't disturbed. His mind was so fixed. And we get a little cut on our finger, and then that's the end of the game. You know, the slightest thing that happens, in our life, we get a little physical ailment or some mental obstacle or some behavioural issue or some issue with a devotee or something like that, and then we're ready to throw in the towel. But if we follow in the footsteps of these great Mahajans, we can learn how to become stronger in devotional service. Our devotional service and our advancement in Krishna consciousness is not dependent on anyone else. It's dependent on us and our connection with Krishna through spiritual master, through authorized devotional service. So here, the distinction between a devotee and a Brahmin, expert in karma kanda or Vedic ritualistic ceremonies, and sometimes people don't understand that. I remember doing one wedding here, and normally devotee weddings, we do them quite simply because the whole kind of aspect of it is the common denominator is service to Krishna, and we consider ourselves both servants and assisting each other in serving Krishna, following the directions of Guru, etc. This is the basis of it. But because someone was attached to a particular ritualistic thing, which is kind of inconsequential. It's about like how many cows you're going to give in charity and things. It's like nobody's doing that nowadays. But they were feeling like the wedding was incomplete. So we did it. We quickly just rearranged it and did it because we've seen that the people weren't happy with it. And that for in their mind, they had to have that ritual. But the ritual is there sometimes just there to satisfy the mind in some way, but actually it doesn't have any real meaning. If you're making some vows to do something which is never going to happen, there's no point in making them. It's kind of, it's not so relevant. So this is Vedavadarata. Does anyone know what Vedavadarata is? It means being attached to the Vedic rites. It's a bit like Niyamagraha, where we're attached to the rules and regulations without knowing the purpose behind them. And as such, one can become too attached to these rules and regulations. That doesn't mean the regulative principles. Without knowing the purpose behind them. And then if one is too attached to them, we base so much of our Krishna consciousness on that, the detail rather than the principle, then when it becomes troublesome, then we reject it. If our following is fanatical, then our acceptance is fanatical, and then our rejection will be on the same basis, fanatical. So our acceptance of Krishna consciousness has to be more than sentimental or fanatical. It has to be philosophical, so that whatever is coming and going in our life, then we're able to maintain our Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, the mind's in control, the mind's dictating. Just like the mind can become very critical, then that dictates, how we see things. And then we throw the philosophy out the window. So we have to keep to the philosophy, and then that brings things into focus. Whatever we're feeling, it will pass. Just like in Scotland, it seems like the rain's never going to stop. Then it does actually, sometime. Just even if it's in between the showers. And when we're going through some difficulty, sometimes it's difficult to understand how this can simply be some purification. But my own personal experience is that when you're going through something, the best course of action is to take shelter in the holy name, take shelter in Krishna consciousness, and perform devotional service. There was a great example of one devotee who used to live here. She was very steadfast in her service, but her mind, she joined with a troubled mind, and her mind would give her difficulty, but she had a certain understanding of Krishna consciousness that regardless of what's going on in your mind, you just carry on with your service. And sometimes she'd be like tears streaming from the eyes, but she'd still be doing her service. And in that way, she was actually transcending her karma, transcending whatever the modes of material nature were coming at her with. And it was a great example because this is the process that materialistically things may be coming into our life, on our path, etc. And if we carry on with our devotional service, just accepting that which comes, then we transcend our karma. Otherwise, if we try to justify it, blame others, etc., then we're still stuck with it. So this distinction between a devotee and a Brahmin, it's interesting because Prabhupada talks about that, and obviously he's talking about this ISKCON society because this is who he's preaching to. He's preaching to the devotees here. So the principle is to become a first-class devotee. So he's talking about someone who is above a Brahmin. So the Brahminical qualities are mentioned here, such as following religious principles, speaking truthfully, controlling the senses, undergoing austerities and penances, being freed from jealousy, being intelligent, being tolerant, creating no enemies, performing yoga, giving charity, being steady, being well versed in Vedic study, and observing vows. So one has to at least have those qualities And it's not that we have to become a Brahmin first, because here it's mentioned if one is born in a high family like that of a Brahmin, Kshatriya or Vaishya, but is not a devotee of the Lord, all his good qualifications a Brahmin, Kshatriya or Vaishya are null and void. Indeed, they are considered decorations of a dead body. So one may have material qualification, but if it's not used in Krishna's service, Prabhupada referred to it as zero. Right? If you have one qualification, it's zero. If you have another qualification, it's zero, it's zero. But you put Krishna in front, it says Krishna is the one. Put Krishna in front, then it becomes 10, 100, 1,000, a million, like that. So whatever we have, if we can use it in Krishna's service, we have this human form of life. And it's sometimes we underestimate how valuable this human form of life is. Because the animals, they're simply going on instinct and very reactionary. And they're quite living in the present, but they don't have the ability to philosophize. They don't have the ability to make choices. They're basically controlled by their senses, because in the previous life, this is what they did. They followed their senses, so they get a body which is suitable for that. But the human form of life, that gives us the opportunity to think beyond simply eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. These are the 4 animal propensities. And in fact, Prabhupada explains that we should try to minimize these activities, try to reduce them to zero. Now, we shouldn't do that artificially. Sometimes you see people may artificially renounce things, but that creates a problem if they're not sufficiently purified. There was an example of the devotee who took it upon himself to chant extra rounds and doing so many fasts, etc. And Prabhupada was not pleased with it. He was thinking that, or people were thinking, oh, this is so advanced. But because Prabhupada never asked for it, then it wasn't actually pleasing to the spiritual master. And of course, the devotee was unable to sustain it, which indicated that Prabhupada knew it wasn't right for the devotee at that time. So therefore, we have to engage in devotional service, because if we simply take to chanting all the time and we're not sufficiently purified, then eventually we'll just start thinking of sense gratification. What's in the heart will have to come out. And in the process of devotional service, then engaging the senses, purifying the mind through the medium of engaging the senses in the service of the Lord, Rishikesha, Sevanam Bhakti Ruchate, then this is the way to purify the mind and senses. And engaging our passions in devotional service, otherwise our passions go inward, material desires come up, etc. So devotional service is a very practical thing. I remember Prabhupada said that devotees should work so hard that at night time all they can do is sleep, especially the householders. They've got no energy for anything else. And that can be the same for everybody, if you feel like, troubled by sex desire or some other material thing, but generally it all culminates in sex desire. The Maitunya Agra, the shackles of sex life, and we see people make so much elaborate arrangements in the city, but really it boils down to one thing, isn't it? So in order to keep that distant, Krishna says, keep all abominable activities far distant by devotional service. Because devotional service is actually directly connecting us with Krishna and back to yoga. And in the beginning, sometimes we don't feel so enthusiastic about it, but that's an indication that we need to do it. If it was such that we didn't feel some aversion at times, then that would mean we're completely purified and we'd be doing devotional service. But if we feel some aversion and we back off, then it means that we have a great opportunity there to transcend whatever is a hurdle there in the way of our service. It may appear this, that, the next thing is causing something, but we should continue with our service regardless. This is the way to overcome any obstacles, unmotivated and uninterrupted. This is what we're aiming for. And sometimes it is motivated. We don't realize we're motivated, and sometimes it does get interrupted. So we have to practice it so that it becomes unmotivated and uninterrupted. And this is what's going on in the spiritual world. There's that prayer of what the Christian says, isn't it? Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So if we want to be in the spiritual world, enjoying the eternal pastimes of the Lord, being part of those pastimes, then we get a chance to do that here and now. This is the opportunity we have. And Prabhupada also says that devotional service begins when things are difficult. So this means this is, okay, it's all devotional service, it's all connected, but engaging it when things are difficult, this is when we get so much, we attract the Lord. Krishna is attracted by the devotees trying to serve in the material world when it's difficult. And this is, although Krishna is all attractive, then he's attracted by the devotees' efforts, especially those in the material world trying to serve. So Prahlad Maharaj is speaking of the Vipras, the learned Brahmins, not just the Brahmin, but a Vipra is a learned Brahmin. And what to speak of the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, he's actually speaking about the Brahmins, the devotees better than that. So it's stated in the Shastra that in Kali Yuga everyone's lower than Sudra. How can that be? I thought there were 4 natural orders of society. Don't we have? No, naturally. Who are the Brahmins of Kali Yuga? Who are the so-called intelligent class of Kali Yuga? Who do people accept as authority? Getting there. Scientists, right, they speak as if a scientist says something, it's the truth. They're the sadhus, the pandits of Kali Yuga. But the scientists get it wrong, don't they? Like back in the early 20th century, they come out with this tooth and said that this was the tooth of some kind of missing link. And from that, they did the newspaper article. When I was living in Cambridge with Sadhaputta, and he brought back this old newspaper article from back in 1906 or something. In those days, the scientists were known as mad scientists, and and there's a term, I don't know if that term, don't know if that term is still there, but it used to be they called them mad scientists. They were desperate to establish themselves in some way or another, so they'd make some far-reaching claims. So they had this tooth, and they speculated that, and according to this, we can determine the environment that this missing link lived in, along with the family. And they had like a family of like 8 men in the trees and things round about them. This was a picture in the newspaper. And then 6 years later, they discovered it was a tooth of an extinct pig. And Sadhaputta was saying that they were often doing things like this. They were trying to make some claims, and then they were getting ridiculed. And then the whole missing link thing, right? They had the Piltdown man, the Java man. These were manufactured missing links. They take a bone from this and a bone from that, and they try to make it seem like, okay, this is the skull of a missing link person. And then they discovered that they were cheating as well. It was another cheat. So they had these ones, like, so. The thing is that they may be the intelligent class of people, because generally in the Vedic culture, it wasn't that everybody would read and write and understand Sanskrit and be able to read the Shastras, because it takes quite a long time to learn that, a lot of study, and not everybody has inclination or capacity. So if one is trained as a Brahmin, it's not just sufficient to be born in a Brahmin family, but if one is trained as a Brahmin, then they would be trained to understand the Shastra and explain them to the people in general, many of whom would be illiterate. or to a large degree illiterate. So they would, and if they're pure-hearted, then they would explain things in such a way that people could understand and gradually become elevated in their consciousness and become free from entanglement in the material world. And if they're unscrupulous, then they would maybe make up some deviant philosophy and exploit the people. So we see with the scientists, they also speak a language which people don't understand. People in general don't understand scientific terminology. They make up big words such as punctuated equilibrium, right? So who knows what punctuated equilibrium means? Hands up. So if you do know what it means and you're just too shy to put your hand up, then what it means is, going back to the missing link, that okay, there seemed to be some species evolving like this, and then there was a gap, and then it was like this. So that gap is called punctuated equilibrium. That okay, there's no gap, we can't find it, so we'll just jump from there to there. We'll call it punctuated equilibrium. So they just give it a name, and then that means it must be okay. The scientists say that they've got a big name for it. I don't know what it means, so it must be right. So once again, taking advantage of the ignorance of the people. And then you hear people speaking about this as if it's just a fact, but it's still an unproven theory. And because people don't know enough, then they just accept it. But so the Brahmins of society are the scientists, and the Kshatriyas, they would be the politicians, administrators, etc. So naturally these things are always there, because you need that for any society to run. Even a demoniac society would require these different orders for organization. So you'd have people who'd administrate, and then you would have people who would be providing food and commerce, etc., the Vaishyas, and then the Sudras, the labouring classes. So it says in Kali Yuga that everybody is less than Sudra. So that would mean that the other four classes, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, because they don't have any qualified, then it means everybody must be less than that. So this is actually a blessing in disguise, because then the only option is to become a devotee. We don't have enough time to learn how to become a Brahmin. We may not have the wherewithal to be like a qualified Kshatriya. The Kshatriyas were very, very austere, and they had also great qualities. If you read about these qualities in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains the qualities of each of them and the duties of them. But here, the Chandala is considered to be the lowest, which is a dog eater. So why would that be lowest? You would think perhaps eating a cow is lower, wouldn't you? What are cow eaters called? Lecture. No, is that not worse than eating a dog? That's true. There are some people like that. They say that there's, I won't say the name, but there's certain type of people that will eat everything on the air except for an aeroplane, everything on the land except for a car, everything from the sea except for a ship. So anything moving or non-moving that goes in the mouth. And it's interesting because then we can see, as devotees, we can see Kali Yuga getting worse, because they're talking about nowadays, due to what they call food shortages, they're thinking of insect farms where they can make millions of insects, crush them and make them into a powder and serve it out as a protein powder. You know, such ugra karma mentality. This is Kali Yuga getting worse by the day. We don't have time to hang about here. Otherwise, maybe next birth we're getting fed insect protein powder mixed with baby formula right from the start. It's such a risky thing hanging about in this material world, and we let things get in the way of it. Which there's a bigger problem. The problem is to solve this problem of repeated birth and death. Because problems are always going to be there in the material world. It's the nature of the world. We're in an incompatible situation. We're a spirit soul in the material world. We've forgotten our spiritual position. We've forgotten our spiritual nature. And this Krishna conscious movement is specifically designed to reconnect the souls with Krishna. In that process, there's anartha nivritti, giving it unwanted things. We can't carry our baggage with us. We have to leave it behind. It's just the way it is. If we want to hold on to our baggage and go back to Godhead, we might get a bit of a disappointment. And sometimes these things are called anarthas, but one of the biggest difficulties we have is we don't actually even see them as anarthas. We see them as artha. We see it as being wanted, because their desire is so strong to enjoy in the material world. Even though we're suffering, we're still trying to enjoy. So therefore, we have to continually read the Shastra so that our intelligence is cultivated by the words from pure devotees, from the words of the Lord. We have to discuss these things so we can understand them better. We have to engage the mind and senses in devotional service. And of course, most of all, we have to chant the holy name. Satatam kirtayanto mam. Our go-to place when things are difficult should be to the holy name. And that way we keep ourselves in Krishna's shelter. So of course, when Prabhupada qualifies here, he says that a devotee is better than anyone, for they are situated in the transcendental position on the Brahman platform. So he qualifies this here with the verse from Bhagavad Gita 14:26. Mam cha yo vyabhicharena bhakti yogana sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahmabhuya yakalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, who does not fall down in any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So this is what we're aiming for. It's not simply that we have, they used to say that, because there's the chapter in, I think it's the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, devotional service, change of heart, is that right? Second canto. So the devotees used to tell us that devotional service is a change of heart, not a change of dress or a change of makeup. We put on our makeup, we put our tilak on, and instead of putting on our jeans and t-shirt, sometimes we do that for service. Then we put on a dhoti or a sari. And these things are also good, you know, in a certain level. They help us identify as a devotee. And I remember one Prabhupada disciple telling us that when we feel inclined to act in a certain way which is not devotional, then we say, no, tell our mind, no, I don't do that, I'm a devotee. So we're aspiring to be a devotee, and this is the aspiration to engage in full devotion service, not fall down in any circumstance. So this is in line with Prahlad Maharaj here, that regardless of what was thrown at him, we can see that we would have folded at the first thing. As soon as Hiranyakashipu said, you know, one word to us, we'd have just been his humble servant. Would have been terrified, right? Well, we don't know, but we can understand that even the demigods, they were at the beck and call of Hiranyakashipu. But Prahlad Maharaj, he didn't give up his devotional service despite all the challenges which were experienced by him. So, of course, we may fall down, but we can get back up. We only lose when we don't get back up again. So for whatever the situation may be, then we just continue with our devotional service. And also it's important to just go through this last couple of points, is that sometimes so-called caste Brahmins are very much envious of the devotees. He was referring to the European and American devotees in the Krishna conscious movement, are sometimes accepted as Brahmins, but the so-called Brahmins are very much envious of them. And sometimes that comes in different ways. It can come in the way that they try to disqualify them by seeing their faults, criticizing them, or it can come in the form of sometimes devotees are visiting the holy dam, and these so-called caste Brahmins will harass the devotees. As soon as they see white skin, they think, oh, it must be a crorepati, so they just want to lever some money out of their pocket. It's a very funny story in this regard. I had a godbrother who was in Vrindavan, and he was staying at Govardhan for a bit, and he was doing Govardhan parikram, and he actually, it was a very, very hot time of the year, so he was just wearing a gamcha. I think he had one gamcha here and one gamcha there. That was it. Going around bare feet, and he came to Radhakund, and he was taking some water on his head, and somebody came up, asked him for a donation, and he goes, no pockets. And still he wouldn't take it. It's like, I've only got gamcha, no pockets, no rupees, and he still wouldn't take it. And he was harassing him down the street. It's like, where am I supposed to take out, like from at the top of my head or something? So he couldn't believe it, and the man was getting really worked up and very angry with the devotee about this. So we can see that sometimes this is it, that they've got the opportunity to sit at Radhakund and chant, or any other holy place. Some holy places devotees just don't even go because they're so harassed by the pandas. Panda doesn't mean like a big cuddly bear. It means like these so-called temple residents who they don't do anything, and they simply harass the visitors for maintenance. And if they don't give, then they curse them. I think the amount of curses they've given, they probably get no potency to curse anybody. Because when you give a curse, then you lose the potency, isn't it? I remember one devotee, he just got Brahmin initiation. He says, does that mean I can curse somebody now? And the devotee said, that's the first reason not to get Brahmin. The Brahmin's supposed to be a well-wisher. So that's one way that they can be envious, that they're envious of the wealth that these Western devotees have, but that's their good karma. Because envy is not a very practical thing. Prabhupada said it's impractical, because if someone's karma is to have something, but we want it, and not only that, we want them not to have it, we want exactly what they have, then it's almost like the child who goes into the shop and just before them is another child gets the item that they wanted, and then they start crying, and then the shopkeeper brings another identical one and says, oh, here's another one. No, I don't want that one, I want this one. So it's already in our heart from previous lives. It's intrinsic. This is our rebellion against the Supreme Proprietor, the Supreme Enjoyer. So they have an opportunity, living in a holy place, etc. And also those who are born into a Brahmin family, or even born into a family of devotees, they have a great opportunity. But it's what they do with that opportunity, that's the main thing. If you get that opportunity and it doesn't serve you well, you'd be better not having the opportunity. You'd be better in a situation which is going to bring you to Krishna consciousness one way or another. So therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, even if I have to be born as an insect, let me be born, I'd rather be born in an insect of a family of devotees than as a Brahma averse to you. So whatever the situation is, as long as I'm not born in the company of people who are averse to you. And naturally, if a devotee is in the company of people who are averse to Krishna, then that forces him out of that company into the company of devotees. And the company of devotees actually is very short. It's a short list of people we can associate with. We don't have that many we can associate with. So even the worst devotees, Prabhupada said, is better than the best karmi, best non-devotee. Because the non-devotees you can't discuss Krishna consciousness with, can you? We don't have any opportunity to make advancement. So sometimes we'll get people who are either learned Brahmins or they have an expectancy of us to act as learned Brahmins, but that's not so important. But at the same time, if we say that we're a devotee and devotee is beyond that, then we have to be at least aspiring to be in this level of devotional service, to be beyond it. Not that we just call ourselves a Vaishnava and then we be lazy and we don't have to do anything. For our advancement. So here he's saying with actual experience of devotees Western devotees who have purified their whole family, so much so that a mother at the time of death inquired about Krishna with her last breath. There was an interesting story just popped to mind there. There's a devotee called Harikesh. He was he lives in Alachua now. He was a very intelligent devotee, and he masterminded the distribution of Prabhupada's transcendental literature in the Eastern European countries in the time of the Cold War. And him and other devotees risked life and limb to go and do this, wanted by the KGB, etc. It was no small thing. They installed the deity of Lord Nrsingadev in the Bavarian forest temple there, and they had that deity of Lord Nrsingadev pointing towards Russia, and they were doing pujas every Saturday for the protection of devotees there. That deity is still there. It used to be called Nrsinga Kshetra, but I think they call it another name now. It used to be called Navajyada Nrsinga Kshetra. There's another Nrsinga temple in Germany. Anyone know the name? That'll be it, yeah. Yeah, and the devotees used to go and they would obviously go in disguise, and they'd go in panel vans, and in between the car exterior skin and the wood panel, they'd have books, and they'd screw the panels back on, and then they'd have like a red herring. They'd have other commodities that they were bringing into the country which were allowed, but secretly they were loading these books. And then once the Cold War was over and this Soviet Republic collapsed, then there was such an influx of devotees came from there. So the story is quickly, it's just that there was some fighting going on between some young Russian men and some other party. I'm not sure where it was, if it was one of the other East Bloc countries, as they used to call them. And this young Russian soldier had been shot and he was dying. And Harry's case comes up to him. And he was quite an amazing personality, extremely intelligent and very prominent devotee. So when this Russian seen Harikesh, Prabhu, he said, "Oh, who are you?" He could see that somebody special just came to him. He said, "I'm Krishna." Of course, he's not Krishna. He wasn't saying it was Krishna, but he's just trying to get him to hear the name Krishna. He said, "Oh, Krishna," and then he died. So just see, who knows how many things have went on like this. And there are many examples also of parents of devotees and other devotees. There was one other one where a disciple of Prabhupada, he was asked to go to Japan. He didn't want to go, and Prabhupada said, "If you go, then I'll make sure whatever happens, I'll make sure I'll take care of you." So he went to Japan, and after some time they got chucked out of Japan because many places, this new Krishna consciousness movement wasn't very well understood or welcome. So he did service for some time. Prabhupada left the planet. This devotee also fell by the wayside, and he went back to Amsterdam, and he got into his previous way of living. And Then he passed away, but his brother went and contacted the devotees and told them what happened at the time of death. I think it was AIDS he was dying of or something. So at the time of death, just at the last moment, he sat up and he said, "Prabhupada, you came." So of course we shouldn't think, okay, let me do a 5-minute service, I'll go back into my nonsense, and then my spiritual master will come and get me at the end. And Prabhupada made that promise to him because he did some big surrender to try to bring Krishna consciousness to a new country where it had never been before. He made a big surrender, big sacrifice. So we also can get that kind of mercy. Although we shouldn't simply just depend on mercy, we have to also have a good sadhana, because that good sadhana will also attract the mercy. That will put us in a position where we're strong enough to surrender to get the mercy. And then the last point is that if we want to benefit our families, or even ourselves, but our families is a little bit more extended, then or society, nation, community, then the best thing is to become a devotee. And I asked this of Sri Swami some time ago, that sometimes a devotee's parents or relative, they pass away, and the devotees want to do some good by putting garlands or tulsi, or do some kind of ceremony for them, but sometimes the family members don't allow it. And Maharaj said, actually, these are all very good, but the best thing, the thing which will mean the most to Krishna, is that you become a devotee. That will bring them more benefit than a tulsi wreath in the coffin or whatever. Otherwise it becomes like a mechanical process, doesn't it? And this is this is the thing. If we're actually, even if we can't be a devotee for ourselves, perhaps we can be a devotee on other people depending on us. We've got the ability to liberate our family members, like Prahlad Maharaj, 10 or 14 generations back and forward. So even if we can't do it for ourselves, we can do it for others. Isn't that right, Kirtike? Okay, anyone got any comments or questions? Yes. So they may be in a family of dog eaters, but it doesn't mean to say they continue to be a dog eater once they're a devotee. It's not like, okay, now that I'm chanting 16 rounds, I can continue eating dogs. Because along with the rounds come the regulated principles of freedom, isn't it? So they may come from a background. It's like, because sometimes people are attached to the Vidyakuli Karibitar, they're attached to their knowledge and their birth. Therefore, this caste consciousness is there, because if they're born in a Brahmin family, they consider this as a high birth, then that's the qualification. But Krishna says guna karma vibhagasa, so it has to be by guna, by qualification, and by karma activities. So even as a devotee, we can't just call ourselves a devotee and not do devotee activities. And simply because someone's born in a Brahmin family doesn't make them a Brahmin. If your father's a brain surgeon, and you just say, "Oh, I'm born in a family of brain surgeon, that makes me a brain surgeon. It must be in my DNA." Then I just only a matter of time, and I can get the scalpel out. So it's by qualification. So, but even here, Prabhupada's saying that even if one has the qualities of a Brahmin, if they're not favourable to Krishna consciousness, and it may well be that someone has these different qualifications, but if they're not favourable to Krishna, then they're less. They're considered less advanced spiritually. And there's an example given in Krishna book, wasn't there? The Brahmins couldn't recognise Krishna and Balaram and the cowherd boys. They wouldn't feed them, so they went to the wives of the Brahmin, who were actually more devotional, and they fed them. The Brahmins were too busy doing the puja and worshipping Narayan. They couldn't see that Narayan came in front of them. So they didn't have that vision to see Krishna was there in front of them. Of course, it's easy for us because we know how the story ends. Yes, last question. Yeah, well, there's other Sanskrit quotas which refute that. Just as bell metals turned into gold by alchemical process, then one who's initiated and trained by a bona fide spiritual master at once surpasses the level of Brahman. So I don't know if you can give me the quote that they refer to. Okay, if you can find it. Because sometimes people make up Sanskrit. It doesn't mean to say it's coming from a bona fide Shastra. So if we can find out what the quotes are, if they want to actually quote something, see what the context of it is. Because here Prahlad Maharaj is saying quite clearly, and in other places in the Shastra. Alright, that's your homework. Iskon Guru ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, Kantaraj Srimad Bhagvatam ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.